Okay, welcome to the November webinar from Top Step Consulting. We are going to talk about standardizing reports in your OpenAir environment. This is a topic we have not covered before, although it is a lot of the things that we're going to be covering today are, I would say, every customer that I've worked with has dealt with these types of issues at one point or another. So I think it's something that applies to all of us. Technically, I would say this is probably geared more toward a system administrator, but really anybody involved in the system that uses reports at all will benefit from this. I expect that we will get a lot of these things you'll see you're doing already. A lot of them you may not have ever heard of. A lot of them you'll probably be reminded, oh yeah, I should really be doing that. I meant to do that. So let's go ahead and get started. The agenda is we are going to take you from crawling to walking to running. And we're going to start with the basics of just creating reports. This is not report training. We're not going to cover how to create reports. What I am going to cover is some tips and tricks to make the report creation process simpler and easier on you over time. Once we're crawling, we're going to talk about sharing and organizing. This is, I would say, kind of the phase that most companies I see are in. They're sharing a lot of reports. They're trying to organize them in some way. So I have lots of ideas for you along those lines. But then even once you do that and you're organized with how your reports are stored and shared, there's even more you can do along the lines of standardization. And that's really, I think, kind of the meat and potatoes of this presentation. How do you get everybody on the same page? Or what does that mean? And then the last topic we'll cover is, okay, now that you know what's missing and what needs to happen, here's some things to help you get your system cleaned up and back on track. So let's start with crawling and creating reports. There are a few internal switches. I'm amazed at how many people do not have these enabled in their system. These are things that if you bought OpenAir yesterday and you just flipped the switch, these would not be turned on by default. I think that everybody should turn them on. So if you already have them, great. If you don't, please send a request to support and have them enable these features. The first one is exclusive filters. Gives you the ability in a report to filter not only to include things in filters, but to exclude things in filters. Might not seem like a huge deal, but if you have filters where you want to say, show me every department except for Department X. And if you're a large environment, large organization, you have departments changing over time. 6 months from now, your include departments are no longer valid because a bunch of new ones are being excluded from your report. So this way you can just say, exclude this department. The next internal switch I think everybody should use is report folders. Most of you are probably already using these. If you're not, again, request that they be turned on. It lets you organize reports. We're actually going to talk about good ideas on how to use those. And then the last internal switch is report filter sets. A report filter set allows you to say that whoever is running this report, regardless of what they can normally see on their user filter set, this specific report gives them the ability to see data as defined by this filter set. So if most of the time you don't want people viewing cost, but you've built a clean report and you want to be able to let them, actually cost is a bad example. If you want them only to see maybe their team, but for certain reports, you want to say, well, in these cases you can see everybody. Just set up a report filter set. It'll override what they can normally see, and then for that report only, they can see whatever you want them to. All right, more with creating reports. It's amazing how many times I'm working with people and they're showing me their report screens when they're building the report, and they have all of the sections visible and expanded, and they have this really long screen that they're scrolling through. It's kind of a minor tip, but do yourself a favor. If you're not using these sections on the report edit screen, just collapse them. It makes the screen a lot smaller, easier to scroll through. Not a big deal. It's not going to help anybody else but yourself. And the other thing is use notes. I use this all the time. If I'm creating a report, usually I'm creating it because I have an immediate need right now. In 6 months, if I go back and say, what is this report? Why did I create this? I've got all these settings and it looks really specific. What was I thinking? I just put in the notes section whenever I create a report, this is what I was thinking. This is why I'm doing this. This is how I've defined X, Y, and Z. Really helps you down the road when you're trying to figure out, what was I thinking? What is this for? And then the last little tip is there's a checkbox to generate a pivot table file on summary reports. Most of you might be thinking, well, I don't really do pivot tables. I don't need this. I probably won't ever need it. I might not notice it. I recommend just check the box because you never know when you might need it in the future. It doesn't make the report run any slower. It doesn't really cost you anything in terms of performance or anything like that. But if you're saving a report, it might not actually be you that needs it, but somebody you're sharing with or somebody you send it to. So check the box in advance so you don't run a report down the road and then say, oh, I wish I had a pivot table file, edit, click the box, run it again. So just a little time saver. If you're using custom calculations, this is just a tip that I've picked up and now I recommend it really across the board. Here's the scenario where this becomes really helpful. You can see my report here. I'm showing recognized revenue in the first column. I have projected revenue in the second column, and then I have this thing called total revenue. It's a custom calculation. I added an asterisk so that I know it's a custom calculation. In this case, it's recognized plus projected. Well, projected is 0, so if I didn't see that asterisk, I might be thinking, why do I have recognized revenue and total revenue? Aren't they the same thing? This doesn't make sense, and then I might be tempted to remove one or the other from the report and then be confused. It also helps people reading reports. We just know that, hey, this isn't a field I can look at or a real thing. It's a custom calculation. And therefore, if you don't know what the calculation is, at least you know where to go find it, to find that definition. So you might be thinking, well, I'm going to forget to do that. I might remember today, but I have 5 admins, and they're all creating custom calculations here and there. I'm not going to remember to do that. So do yourself a favor. Add a little note to the form in your custom calculation screen. You have form permissions there, and you can add notes in the form permissions. So just put a little reminder. I have this one in red. Always add asterisk to the end of title. That way, if it's not you, but it's somebody else creating a custom calculation, they'll see that, oh, they're all named with an asterisk, and here's a reminder to do that for this new one I'm creating. All right, those are my tips for creating reports. Let's move on to sharing and organizing. A lot of people ask, how should I use folders? Should I have a folder for John, Bob, and Sally? Should I have a folder for all my project management reports? How should I do it? This is my recommendation. It's not a hard and fast rule. It's a place to start. I recommend you do it. Organize them by function first, and then by region if applicable. And try to keep the functions fairly high level at first. If you get too many reports, then maybe start expanding your subfolders. But as a place to start, just start with kind of the 4 main areas. I think of the four main areas of the system of projects, accounting or finance, people, and process. We're actually going to talk about that more in a minute. So those 4 main buckets. And then regionally underneath each of those, if applicable, try to avoid having folders for specific individuals. Try to think of them more by function because those individuals may come and go, and then you're thinking, wait, this John folder, who should I share that with now? For each of these folders, share the folder level rather than the report itself. Share the folder with an assignment group. So in a complex organization like this demo here, we have lots of different folders. These are geared towards different audiences. For each of the folders, I've created an assignment group. So you can see that finance, EMEA, has a separate assignment group. And I've named those assignment groups with a reports prefix. That helps me so that I don't inadvertently add them to an assignment group thinking that they're getting access to some projects or not knowing if they're getting access to projects they shouldn't for their timesheets access. This way I'm saying, hey, this is just for reports access. And use that naming convention consistently. If you do it this way and you lay out your folders kind of in advance, thinking ahead rather than based on what reports you have now, you can really streamline the process of sharing reports. That way you just drop a report in a folder, it's automatically shared with the right audience. So in this example, we have an EMEA project manager who has access to the project management reports folder, but only the EMEA subfolder. They don't have access to the finance EMEA folder this way. So when they log in and they're looking at their shared reports, one of them that we're seeing is shared with them is just the EMEA project management reports. Nice and clean for them. They don't have to wade through a bunch of folders that aren't applicable to them. All right, the next step with report filter sets. I mentioned enable that switch just a second ago. I like to call these self-service reports. Create one version of a report, share it with a large group of people, but use a filter set that controls when whoever runs the report, it limits the results that they see. So the first example I have is a utilization report. If you have one definition of utilization that works, share that with who needs a utilization report. Might be everybody. And then put a report filter set that I've called reports self-view only. And in that filter set, next to the arrow, you see the user access is just myself. So whoever's running this shared report, not their own version, but the shared version, they're going to see the utilization, but they're only going to see it for themselves. And the same works for project managers. If you want to have just only show projects that I own, that's what the bottom example shows. So this requires additional filter sets. I recommend if you use these, don't try to repurpose existing filter sets. You might be thinking, well, I've already got 20 filter sets. It's already crowded. Let me just use this one that will work. Don't give in to that temptation, because that one that you used for reports might be modified down the road and you're not going to know it. So create a separate set of filter sets just for reports. Give it a reports prefix so it doesn't inadvertently get applied to somebody's user record. And then only use them on these reports, on the report filter set. Then what you can do is you can take all these self-service reports, put them in their own folder. Anybody who needs access to whatever these standard company-wide reports are, they're all in one folder that you share with everybody. Or maybe you have a folder for project manager self-service reports and consultant self-service, etc. But then everybody's looking at the same version of the report, only viewing the data that's applicable to them. Be careful with this. The problem with this that people run into is they think, oh, great, I can create one timesheet report for hours last week, and I can share it and send it to everybody, schedule it each week. The problem is it does not work when you are scheduling them, because when you schedule a report, the person running it is you, the report owner. So that filter set is going to say, here is my utilization or my hours for last week, and you just sent your own hours to everybody in the company. So it doesn't work with that. It really only works for reports that people just need to use as needed. All right, let's talk about dashboard reports. If you are using graphical dashboards, I recommend you don't create graphical dashboards out of reports that you use for other things. So if you have a normal report that you're using and you think, you know, this would be great in a dashboard, so you create a dashboard using it, I recommend you don't do that. Instead, create a copy of the report and give it a prefix of dash in the report name, and put it in a separate folder that's just for dashboard reports so you can keep them separate. The reason is you might want to tweak your dashboard, make a couple adjustments here and there, but not impact that report that you or somebody else might be depending on for some other reason. So you might modify either the dashboard or the report, not realizing the impact it's having on one or the other. So to do that, separate them in the first place. And when you give it that dash prefix, it's much easier to find when you're creating dashboard reports. That list of reports that's available is going to show you everything you have access to, your own reports and the reports that are shared with you. So restricting that to just say, you know, all I've got to do is look for those that start with dash. They all show up in a group there, and it's much easier to know what you're looking for. All right. Let's talk about standardization. That's the whole point of this webinar, is how do we actually get everybody on the same page. So as I mentioned before, I think of reports in 4 main categories. Now, I don't want to oversimplify this. Of course, most reports or many reports are more complicated than this. For example, where does a timesheet report fit? Is it people or projects? It's really both, right? So it's not a science. It is just a way to start thinking about standard definitions and standard reports across these 4 categories. So in the next couple slides, I'm going to actually highlight some baseline definitions and basic reports that we think that everybody should start with. And what I mean is, you should, if you measure these things that we're about to review, you should have a standard written, distributed, agreed on definition of what do we mean by each of these things. So let's start with the projects and accounting reports. As a starting place, I think that these are the projects reports that you should have defined. Project profitability or margin. Some of the questions around that are, is this billing margin or is it revenue margin? Which cost level do we use for project managers if you're using more than one cost level? I'm actually constantly amazed at how many different types of definitions people have for margin. It seems like a very simple thing. Well, it's revenue and cost, right? Well, maybe. But what type of cost? Do you count expenses cost? Do you count purchases cost? What about contractors? How are you handling those? So getting a clean definition around that, I recommend. Plan hours definition. Notice I didn't say planned, I said plan. So you sign a contract for a project, you're setting it up in the system. You expect some number of hours to occur, whether it's fixed fee or time and material. What is that number of hours that you expect? Everybody has a different term for it. But in terms of OpenAir, when you want to compare how did we actually do against what did we expect, how are you defining what we expect? And are you doing that consistently across the board? Are you using booked hours? If so, do you ever change those? If you do, maybe that's not a good candidate. Are you using planned hours or budget hours on the project level? Or are you doing baselines? Lots of different ways to get there. You need to make sure that everybody's on the same page and that your reports reflect that same page. Remaining budget, how do you define how much budget you've burned? This might, again, seem really simple, but if you're saying, well, it's just how much we've billed, right? How much have we billed versus what's our budget, and that tells us what's left. Well, the trick is if you're mid-month and you haven't actually billed anything for the current month, you still want to be able to report on, well, how much have we used? Even though we haven't billed or invoiced, how do we report on what we've kind of earned so far in the month so that we can get a good, accurate remaining budget value based on where we are right now, not based on what we billed last month. And then remaining scheduled hours versus remaining budget hours. This is a tricky one, but it's worth the mental effort required to get it to lay this out if you haven't done it already. You want to be able to see, based on where we are on the project now and how many hours we think it's going to take to finish the project, how does that number compare against our remaining budget hours? So that's a great one. If you can define this, and not everybody can because of the nature of their business or the nature of their configuration, if you can define this, this is a great heads up for, hey, it looks like we're going to go over budget or come in ahead of budget. Accounting reports, actual and projected revenue and billing, those are standard. Obviously, that's kind of what most people expect from the system, accounting-wise. But understanding, again, what is actual revenue in the middle of the month if you haven't run revenue? Do we report on revenue through yesterday, or do we just say, as a standard, we only report on revenue through last month because we generate revenue monthly? So in terms of reporting, it's not only important to understand how do we define actual and projected revenue, but also how are we going to choose to report on it? Because if I'm expecting to report on revenue through yesterday, I need to be sure that the system is set up to support that. Otherwise, if I can't do that for whatever reason, I need to set expectations that when you report on revenue, you get monthly values, you don't get middle of the month values. Same goes for billing. WIP and deferred revenue, if you're not getting this out of the system, you can definitely do it, assuming that you're using revenue and invoicing out of OpenAir. There's some built-in calculations, or you can use custom calculations to do that if you need to. If you're using cost centers, and you're using cost centers to track costs and revenue by cost center, you want to be sure that your reports are set up to reflect that. Cost centers are actually really tricky in reports, depending on what you're expecting them to do. For example, if you have a report that's filtered on a particular cost center, only show me data for this cost center. What you're saying is you're only reporting on the transactions that are stamped with that cost center, not the projects that have that cost center selected. So if you have several projects with cost center A and you filter a report on cost center A, it doesn't necessarily mean you're just pulling those projects. You could be just pulling revenue that has that cost center A, which sometimes can be different. So that's tricky. Because it's tricky, you want to define that up front. And again, average bill rate. How do you define that? All right. The second two categories of reports I tend to think of as people and process. I've listed them here as resource reports and audit reports. So in resource reports, utilization, you might have one definition. You might not have defined utilization. You might have three definitions, which I've seen. What types of utilization do you track, and how do you measure that? Be very, very specific in OpenAir terms. What hours count towards the numerator in OpenAir, whether it's based on time type, task type? What hours count towards the denominator? What's their work schedule except for holidays, except for sick time unless it's this type, etc. Get all that written down. Projected utilization, if you're tracking this, maybe using bookings into the future based on people's schedule and how many hours they're booked. Does it matter if it's a particular booking type? What about vacation? Things like that. Available hours based on who's already assigned or booked to a set of projects. How many hours are left is a good available hours report. Accrual balances, that's kind of out of the box, although you might be surprised some of those accrual transaction reports can be a little tricky. Average bill rate per person, if you're tracking that, not everybody does. Revenue contribution, this is a big controversy that I bump into a lot, where you want to give people credit for contributing a certain amount of revenue. It's really common. How do you do that for fixed price projects is extremely tricky. It's a bit of a math problem, because if somebody works too many hours, then that's actually bad on a fixed fee project. So there's almost an inverse relationship between revenue contribution and hours on fixed fee projects. So how do you reflect that in reports? You want to get clear on that. Audit reports or process reports, here you're looking for bad data, basically. So you're looking for users that haven't logged in a certain number of days, that are inactive. Maybe they've left the company and you just didn't get the memo. Users for permissions and access. So this is a very, very important report. I recommend you run it monthly or quarterly at a minimum. A report that shows you department, role, primary filter set, module access, job title, things like that. Anything that's going to help you look, identify anomalies that says, hey, everybody in this role has this filter set except for this person. Why is that? Just making sure that they've been set up consistently. Looking at missing data in their property screen, looking at their cost to make sure everybody has cost populated if you're tracking that. And in terms of projects, inactive projects, you can report on last time entry date for projects, and then just sort on that to see, wow, these projects haven't had any time in months. Maybe we need to inactivate these or close them out or do something. And then projects that haven't been fully set up yet. If you require approval processes on projects or certain custom fields, run a quick report to just make sure that everything's populated. And then, of course, if you're not running your new reports on timesheets, then you're probably not using OpenAir. That's where everybody starts. But still, I included in the list of these are baseline reports that everybody needs. Apart from timesheet status, I actually like to have a report that just shows me open timesheets that are old, for example, or rejected timesheets, or rejected expenses, rejected invoices. Anything that's open or rejected that's not fairly recent is a good thing to just tap somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, why is this still out there? We need to clean this up. So those are the baseline standard reports that we recommend you start with. I just took a few minutes to outline them. Obviously, this represents a lot of work if you haven't done that already. My goal is that some of these will spark an idea in you thinking, oh, I should actually be tracking that. That's a good idea. That would be a good metric. All right, let's talk about maintenance issues. Anybody ever had an admin move on? If that admin or whoever is kind of the reports owner, if you will, the reports go-to person, if they leave, it creates a mess. I've seen this time and time again. People asking questions like, is that John's version or Lisa's version? I'm not sure which one to use. And somebody says, well, aren't they the same? What's the difference? John used to use Lisa's version, and somebody else said, oh, I've got my own version. I like this one. Now you've got all these versions of reports, confused people, wasting time, and possibly not actually reporting on standard definitions of the things that we just described. So that can be a huge pain. Another related pain, it might not seem related, but I'll connect the dots in just a second. Have you ever had this happen if you have a scheduled report that you depend on that somebody else owns, or maybe even you own it? You say, why was this scheduled report collapsed this week but not last week? You know how you can expand and collapse the subtotals? Sometimes I've gotten schedule reports that show, why is this only one section expanded and everything else is collapsed, and it's a PDF and now I'm stuck. I have to rerun the report. That happens because whoever owns that report was in the system using reports and expanding and collapsing, and the system remembered their last settings, and it applied those settings to the scheduled report. But it's worse than that. It's not even that particular report that's shared. It's any report in the same report class. So a report class is like account-wide company summary report. That's a class. Or project detail report is a class of report. So if it was a project detail report that's being shared, but a different project detail report was sorted differently than the way I want it, that's going to affect the shared version of it. These two problems I just described, the admin leaving on and confusion and shared reports, can be fixed with one solution, and that is to have a dedicated user account to own your standard reports. If you are a very large organization, I still like the idea of having one dedicated user rather than 5 users, one for each region, for example. So the idea is nobody uses this user account to log in. Nobody's signing in the morning and say, okay, I'll log in as reports admin. The idea is that whoever is responsible for the company standard version of reports will proxy in as the reports admin, modify reports as needed, and then proxy out. Another idea that I think once you've gone through the exercise of defining those standard reports, you've defined them, you've created them, you've got a central reports user account set up, you've created your folders, you've organized the folders, you've created self-service reports, you've done all of these tips we've talked about so far, and you are organized. Take the extra little bit of time to document them in a report catalog. Call it what you want. We've done these for clients, and I'll show you a couple samples here in a couple slides. But the idea is make this catalog easy to find for anybody using reports. You can see I've got a link to one on the message board. However you want to make that available and easy to find. Just do a Word document. It doesn't have to be complicated. But the things that you want to include on that is an organized way to find everything, like a table of contents. So you can kind of browse through, I think it's this type of report, and then a way to drill down into each report in the catalog, see a screenshot of it to see, yeah, that looks kind of close. I'll use that as a starting point. And also maybe a few key properties of the report, like a description, where to find it, which folder it's in, who it's shared with, things like that. So somebody might see, this report looks great. It's exactly what I need, but it's not shared with me. Maybe I need to request that I get access to it or some version of it so I don't have to create it from scratch. So here's what that can look like. This is a screenshot of one that we've created. It just shows a table of contents here, some information about the catalog, how the report folders are organized, and then by main section, again, people, projects, process, and accounting. This one starts with financial reports, and then within financial it drills down miscellaneous revenue forecast. There's lots of them down there. But then I can easily see, oh, I think it's a revenue report. Let me look at these. This is what, so all customer information has been removed from this, by the way, but this is kind of a glance at what it looks like. You see at the top, it's just a table in Word, one page for a report. And I can see the title of the report. I can see a few, like the class, the description. This one has a lot of information. You don't necessarily need to go this far. It shows how many periods are being reported. And then there's a quick screenshot of it. So this one's really wide, lots of columns. I just kind of sliced it into 2 rows so you can get an idea of these are the columns I would see if I run this report. It doesn't show you everything, obviously, but it gives you enough of a starting point to say, yeah, I think that's kind of what I had in mind. That's close, or no, this is not at all what I wanted. And then from there, you can go find it, request access to it, and then modify it as needed. Again, the nice thing about this is if people are starting here for reports, they're starting with standard definitions. They're starting with, if I need a utilization report and the one I have isn't quite right, they're not going to redefine utilization if they're starting here. They're going to start with a good utilization definition and then maybe filter it by department or however they need to. Okay, cleanup strategies. So let's say you're on board with these ideas and you say, you know, there's a lot of stuff there you talked about, Paul, that I think I can really use. But if you saw my environment, you would see a complete mess. I don't even know where to start. So let's talk about that. Some things to clean up. First of all, does this look familiar? The project dashboard. You have projects like John's October hours or Acme Corp weekly billing. Those reports have nothing to do with this project. Or they get really crazy. You have like John's hours for 10/7 through 10/12 on Acme Corp, non-billable. So you see all kinds of reports cluttering up the project dashboard. It's a pain to keep up with. The reason this happens is because when John is creating a report, he's looking at the Save This Report As. He checks the box, he clicks Save, and he is done. That's all he's looking at. He is not looking here, down at the bottom, far away from the Save Report checkbox. There's this usage designation. It's even further away than it used to be. And there's a checkbox there, and if it was checked before, it's going to check it again, and he's going to keep checking away every time he saves a report to make it available on the project dashboard. So that is the cause of why you keep having this issue if you are. And you probably know this already, most of you. So I recommend you do this. If this is a problem for you, you should only have to do it once. Go through an exercise where you are announcing with plenty of notice to the people of interested parties saying, hey, we're going to delete every report on the project dashboard except for the ones that really need to be there. So please tell us which ones really need to be there that are not just applicable to you, but to everybody. And solicit feedback. If you need to put a committee together, you can do that. And give people plenty of notice. If somebody's gone on 2 weeks vacation, you don't want them to miss out on this opportunity. Once you've gotten all the feedback of, okay, these are our list of reports that are going to make the cut, all you have to do then is proxy in as each report owner and modify each report that has that checkbox checked. It is a pain. If you've ever gone through this, you know what I'm talking about. You might have 16 different report owners that have one or more reports on the project dashboard. You have to find all of them, uncheck the box, save the report. That's the only way to clean it up, unfortunately. The good news is when you're looking at your list view of reports, there is an option where you can modify the list view to show whether the project is available in project-specific situations. So you can just sort on that to see, oh, these are all the ones that are on the project dashboard. Makes it a little easier. Then what you do, once you clean it up, then I recommend you take away John's and everybody else's ability to keep doing that and causing more mess in the future. So you can see in this role here, on this project manager role, you can just uncheck the checkbox, specify report usage designations. That's the role setting. Uncheck it so that nobody has that checkbox and the ability to keep cluttering up the project dashboard so that only administrators can do it. That way, if in the future John says, hey, I need this report on the project dashboard, it's useful globally, no problem. Let's just get a consensus and make sure that everybody else agrees, and then we'll add that for you. All right, deleting old reports. The problem with old reports might not seem obvious to you, but my position is old reports hide good reports. The more junk you have out there, the harder it is to find the good reports. So as an annual exercise, maybe twice a year, shouldn't actually be necessary, but at least once a year, go through every old report and tell everybody in advance, we are going to delete every report that has not been run since X. So right now it's November. We might say any report that hasn't been run later than October of 2012 or September, something like that. If it just hasn't been run in Q4 of 2012, then we're just going to delete it. You have this long to fix it. So all you have to do, if there's an old report that you want to hang on to, just go in and just run it. And then we'll see that it's been run recently, and then we'll leave it alone. And the other thing that you should do is delete all reports from inactive users. If you have lots of people using that example a minute ago where the admin left and everybody's still using their version of reports in their shared reports, just tell people, hey, if there's a shared report that you really need, just save it. That way it's your report. It's not a shared report. It'll be recently run, and you will own it. So that won't be a problem. But judgment is coming, you tell them. So whether you give them a month, however long you need, give them plenty of heads up. Communicate several times so nobody feels blindsided by this. And then once you've gone through that exercise, you have the tedious task of deleting unused reports. That's why this is probably a once-a-year exercise. You have to proxy in as each report owner, and you have to sort on the last run date and just click through each one. There's a little delete icon, and just delete them one at a time. So if any of you have interns that you trust with this task, this might be a good candidate for that type of task. If you want to do it at home over the holidays while you have a movie running in the background, whatever you need to do to just go through the hours of deleting this, it is well worth it. And then the step of deleting old reports from inactive users. So many of you know this, but if you don't, under Administration, there's an option there. You can see the screenshot on the left for maintenance settings. If you click on there, you'll see the screen on the right I have. And there's an option that says Delete Saved Reports from Inactive Users. All you do is you just select that radio button, click OK, and it will go through and just do it all in one step. So that part is much easier. I do not recommend you do this without going through the exercise I described of giving people a heads up, because you may in fact have critical operational reports that are owned by users that may perhaps have been recently inactivated. So you don't want to do this on a whim, but it is a good time saver. All right, cleaning up strategies. The next one, I see this a lot, custom calculations. So let's say you are redefining how you calculate billable hours, and it requires a new custom calculation for a billable hours value, or maybe a total billing value in this example. You create your new custom calculation, and you say, great, okay, everybody use this calculation now going forward. We're not going to use this old one. You go to the old one, you try to delete it, and you see you can't. Uh-oh. You scroll down in the tip section, you can see you can't because it's being used by 10 reports. You're thinking, great, which reports are they? No problem. You can run a report. It's called a custom calculation detail report. So just go to Reports, Detail, and Custom Calculation. And you can see what you see here. Select the custom calculation you're interested in and report on the value used by reports. It lists all the report names. It doesn't say who owns them, but this is generally good enough. Then you can go to each of those reports, proxy in as the owner if you need to, remove the custom calculation, replace it with a new one, whatever you need to do, and remove it from all reports. That way, if you need to, you can delete the custom calculation. Not too bad. At least it's possible to track down those reports. Same thing for custom fields. So if you used to use a custom field and you don't use it anymore, but you are wondering, wait a minute, what if it's being used in reports? I've inactivated it. I've removed it from my from the form where it appears, but I just want to make sure that nobody's expecting it to show up somewhere. Let me remove it entirely. So again, same type of report. It's a custom field detail report. You can report on not only used by reports, but anywhere else in the system it's being used. Might be using calculated fields, custom detail fields, email templates, etc. There's the full list. But at least you can find everywhere in the system that that custom field is used, remove it from all those places, and then you can actually delete it. This is a great thing to do for cleaning up the system. If you've been using the system for a while and you've got lots of these old custom calculations and old custom fields, again, they're cluttering up the system. It's tedious, but it's worth it to go through and clean things up. Okay, this is a question I get a lot. What about standard fields? What if I want to show everywhere in the system or every report in the system that's using a particular field? Why would you want to do that? So for example, cost center. I mentioned that scenario a minute ago where people are reporting on cost center, but they aren't actually, they're trying to use it as maybe a project filter, and it's not really working the way they want. So you just want to go through and say, are they using this the right way? Or time type selection. So maybe you've added some time type selections. You want to be sure that those get included in any reports that are using time type. Same with booking type. Anytime you make configuration changes and you're thinking, how does this affect reports? The bad news is that you cannot, in the system, you can't find where these are being used in reports. The good news is it's not simple, but it can be done. My bullet here just says that we can help. So I've actually done this where the way you do it, if you just want a little tip, is there's a way to export all of the data. You can export just the reports table, and then in that file that you get, it's a CSV file. You can, if you're patient and skilled with Excel, you can play around with the formulas, and you can actually drill down and identify, these are all the reports that are filtering on it. These are all the reports that are reporting on it, whatever value you're looking for. Again, it's not simple. It's not worth going through for this webinar. But if it's absolutely critical that this be done, give us a call, and I'd be glad to help you. Keeping it clean, ongoing user training. I can't emphasize this enough. If you have new users using OpenAir, usually the training they get is somebody sits down with them and says, these are reports. These are the ones you need to use. You can modify them however you want. Just figure it out and call me if you have questions. That's usually the report training that I see. Give them some documentation. Give them the report catalog. Record some videos. Whatever you can do to make that initial new user training as smooth as possible. Part of the reason this is so important is because the new users are usually the worst offenders at cluttering up the system, at adding things to the project dashboard, at creating way too many reports, at doing those types of things. So if you can cut down on that up front, all the better. Make your documentation easy to find and easy to use. I recommend you link to it on the dashboard when people log in. And another thing is if you have regular meetings like a resource management call or a project management call where most of the audience is an OpenAir user, just sneak in little reminders like, hey, everybody, as a reminder, you don't have the ability to add projects to the project dashboard. If you want to report on there, just contact an admin and they'll work with you. Things like that, of just reminders of this is our new process, this is how we organize things, these are standard definitions and so forth. And then periodic spot checks, going through, looking through the reports that people are saving as if you don't have enough things to do already. I know most of you are really busy. However, if there's a slow time of year or if you're an admin, go ahead and schedule these into your regular audits and just keep an eye on reports and make sure that they don't get out of hand. All right, I'm going to open it up for questions in just a second. If you all could do me a favor, and if you're not going to ask a question, if you could mute your phone. I'm going to take everybody off mute. While you're doing that, though, a couple quick reminders. Obviously, you know about TopStep because you're here on this call. A couple things you might not know. We've actually worked with over 130 clients. We have done your job, so we aren't just OpenAir experts. We are business operations experts. So we feel your pain, and we know what's realistic and what's not. We do business efficiency assessments. If you haven't worked with us, that's how we start. So we start by looking at how does your business run. It's all process focused. We identify any gaps on where you want to get. How you get there is up to you. If you want our help, great. If you don't, great. But you have a nice roadmap, and that's a great place to start. We also implement OpenAir PSA. And we do release management. So there's a new release coming out this weekend. One of the service offerings that we have is we go through and we test the release. We try to break it. We try to document its limitations and its usefulness, and we make customized recommendations based on how you're using the system already, every release. And we also do outsourced administration. If you need help with these types of things, and you need somebody proactively poking around in the system and identifying this stuff for you, that's another thing that we can help you with. If you're not on the LinkedIn user group already, I recommend you go find it. There are two user groups. There's the official OpenAir user group, and there is the OpenAir user group that we help facilitate. Recommend you join them both. The OpenAir, I think, tends to be a little bit more active, but take a look at both. On there, you'll see our Wednesday weekly wisdom. We do a tip of the week. We do these webinars monthly, and we have an ebook you should definitely check out on our website, 50+ must-have tips for OpenAir. Also, YouTube is new for us. We're starting to release little quick tip training videos, so look for us on YouTube.